Hola, saludos y bienvenidos a todos que se están uniendo y compartiendo con nosotros esta noche. Le damos la bienvenida. Nosotros somos Cultura Elevada, una serie web enfocada en educar y unir a nuestra comunidad latina a través de los beneficios médicos, el impacto social y el crecimiento económico de la planta del cannabis. Soy Mariela Carnaval, la directora de avances de la comunidad latina. Y hoy le tenemos un show espectacular para todos que se están uniendo con nosotros. Por favor, compartan sus redes por Facebook Live. Y si no, siempre saben que pueden ver el replay siempre en nuestra página de Facebook de M4MM United. Le damos unos minuticos para que todo el mundo entre. Bueno, vamos a empezar. Hoy tenemos a nuestro invitado. Él es una persona que si usted está en la industria de cannabis, sabe el nombre de él es bien conocido. Tenemos el honor de recibir con nosotros a Jason Ortiz. Él está con Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Él ha estado en la organización Minorities Cannabis Business Association y reciente se ha unido al Last Prisoners Project. Vamos a dejar que Jason le cuente cómo él empezó y cómo está. Bienvenido and welcome, Jason.
Bienvenidos. Gracias por todo. Thank you, Mariela. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Siempre cuando los conectamos es increíble. Today is going to be a little Spanglish para todos que se unen con nosotros, pero vamos a darle toda la información para que todo el mundo pueda compartir con nosotros porque lo que vamos a hablar es bien importante. Jason, para empezar, tell us, ¿cómo empezaste en esta industria? ¿Cómo fue que decidiste, voy a ir en esta industria de cannabis que está recién empezando y no sabemos en qué dirección va, pero ahí vamos a meterle empeño?
Okay, well, I'm going to try to start from the beginning. And so I first got started in all of my cannabis activism in the year 2000 when I was 16. I was born to two Puerto Rican parents in Connecticut. My dad was from the Bronx and my mom was from Brooklyn, although my mom was born in La Isla. And so when I was 16, I got caught smoking on the way to school. When I got to campus in high school, they came over and brought all the security guards on us. And it was the first time I had been in like very serious trouble. And so I didn't know exactly what the results were going to be. But when a police officer came, that's when I knew it was getting very serious. And when somebody puts handcuffs on your wrists, all of a sudden policy and law become a very real thing. And so because of that, I got kicked out of school. I got thrown in the criminal justice system, had to go to countless court dates and barely avoided getting incarcerated. But luckily, because I had hardworking parents, I was able to make it through it. Eventually did graduate high school, went on to go to the University of Connecticut. And as a student, that's where I was introduced to Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And SSDP is a nonprofit organization and a community of people who want to end the war on drugs, specifically the laws that affect young people and youth. And so I was one of those young people that was affected. And thanks to SSDP, they changed a law called the Higher Education Act's Federal Aid Elimination Penalty, which is a very long way to say if you got arrested for weed, you couldn't get financial aid. But luckily, they changed that. I was able to go to college because of that activism and that advocacy. And so it was both negatively impacted by the war on drugs, but also positively impacted by the movement and the focus on policy. And that's where I learned that a very small change to a law can have a big impact in lots of people's lives. And so I was a policy activist ever since then, was eventually on the national board of SSDP. When I was lucky enough to graduate from college, a good friend from SSDP recruited me, Shalene Title, who was former cannabis commissioner in Massachusetts and now the director of the Parabola Center, recruited me to MCBA to help on the policy team to draft our first model equity bill, a piece of legislation for a state level legalization bill that would outline all what equity means to us. And before that, we had a lot of folks that were angry at the way things were going or wanted to see improvements, but hadn't put it down in writing, the specific laws that we wanted to see actually get implemented. And so we decided to shift from fighting bad laws to writing our own laws and getting our own people to introduce them and getting Latino representatives to be the ones championing them. And so at MCBA, we organized 5 eventually policy summits where we brought people from across the country and sometimes even internationally to come together and decide, what do we want as a community specifically? What kind of licensing structures did we want? What kind of community investment did we want? What kind of criminal justice reform did we want? How many of our people are currently in prison that we need to bring home? So how you do all of that is much more complicated than just saying we want less prisoners, right? We got to figure out new pardon processes. We got to figure out all kinds of things. And so in that role, I was able to really get into the details of equity policy, which served me well when I then went on to help the fight here in Connecticut on legalization. And that was a brutal fight with lots of people of color coming to help us out and advocating. And, shout out to my Boricua brother, Lou Vega, for staying strong and actually getting his license. And now he's on his way to getting 2 dispensaries, actually. He's on his way to his 2nd dispensary, and that's Nautilus Botanicals. And, in all of that process, I got to really put my policy knowledge to the test. And one of the things that you learn in that process is the conversations and the politics that happen outside of the building have a huge impact on what the policy ends up being. And so we got a lot of what we wanted. Some other wild things came out in Connecticut that we weren't prepared for, but we did get home grow. We did get equity set aside. There is an equity program. And so it was a pretty successful, situation, all things considered. And so that passed. I eventually took the job as SSDP executive director after that. And so the last 2 years, I've been training young people on how to end the war on drugs in their communities. And so wherever anybody is, we train them how to make their laws in a local space much more equitable, much more fair, and much more reasonable. And so I was able to do that. We had 80 university chapters across the country, and we did all kinds of great stuff, including a big protest that we did for President Biden for prisoner release back in October. Some folks might remember he eventually did do a sort of pardon action, but we were pressuring him to do more and hopefully faster. And so we'll still be doing that. But it was in that work that I really realized that where I really wanted my focus was on the criminal justice system, getting folks out of prison, making sure that nobody is going back into prison for cannabis crimes, especially in legal states, but anywhere. Places like Texas and Louisiana still giving people life sentences for selling, a couple dime bags. And so we really got to remember that the criminal justice side has not caught up to the industry and how much progress has been made. And so after training a lot of folks, I decided I wanted to focus my efforts, and SSDP covers all drugs, including psychedelics and more stigmatized drugs like opioids and methamphetamine or cocaine. And so we handled very serious conversations about overdose that we'll talk about a little bit later. But I really was most passionate about making sure folks aren't going into prison and getting as many people out of prison as possible. And so now, as the director of strategic initiatives at the Last Prisoner Project, I actually get to help bring our homies home, bring everybody that's locked up out, and bring them so that they can see their families and really end the war on drugs at its most base impact, right? Of just shrinking all the folks that are in prison. And, I feel pretty good that our generation, we're going to be the ones to actually end this madness. It's already happening. We're already pushing it. And so I'm excited to be the person that can put the final nail in the coffin by making sure that every single prisoner that's in there for using drugs is absolutely freed. And we replace it with a system more based in science, reason, and compassion.
It's crazy to think how there's so many people making money off this industry. And even as consumers, we get so excited to support these markets, but yet we still have people that are in jail for minor cannabis crimes.
Yep.
So it's amazing that we have more people like you. And I think you're being very modest about your work. And that was just such a quick little recap. You didn't even tell us on how you made it all the way to Hulu with your documentary, with your protest, with the Last Prisoner Project.
Yeah.
But you definitely are a trailblazer. I know when I first started following you, you were part of the Avengers in New Jersey, getting policy written there with Jessica Gonzalez.
Yeah,
So to
shout out to
see your
Jose
growth,
Gonzalez, acá abogada. She's a Latina
yes,
titan.
yes, I am dying to meet her, but at the same time, it's like I don't want to meet her. So I don't know. We're gonna see how
I
that
would
goes
say
in life.
she's one of the heroes that you should meet. Like when you meet her in person, she's even more impressive in person. You should have her on.
Oh
She'd
my
be.
goodness.
No, we're all in
But
love with her too. I
so
get
tell
it.
us, yeah, she's just and we're gonna totally take this the other way and start talking about her. But it's just amazing to see how we have people that are actually in the ground writing these rules, regulations, the way that it should be that would benefit, especially we are those that are mostly affected. We're minorities, we have less access into the industry, we're incarcerated at higher rates, we don't have the support, the education, and then we have so many barriers that we have to kind of go through. So see us come together as a community and put all the work in, it's surreal because it feels like, yes, you're doing all this work, but do you really understand what you're doing? Like years from now, when you look back at like, these are the people that paved the way. Do you sometimes understand, like, or do you take a moment to reflect and see, wow, this is what I'm doing. I'm changing lives.
So, we were talking earlier that I'm a Virgo and so I'm always planning ahead. And so, like, no, there's never been a time where it wasn't pushing it the next thing, whatever it is. And so, like, every win is always a bit bittersweet because you didn't get everything you wanted. And so, whenever the victory is there, it's always immediately like, well, we got to get the other 7 things that we asked for, right? So, that isn't, but I can tell you, there was one time I was at a friend's party and we were smoking and just, nothing serious going on. And I had a friend of me just go, "Can I give you a hug?" Right? I was like, "Well, I guess, sure." And he just went, "Thank you. Like, you fucking did it." Well, I swear, like we're actually smoking now and like we don't have to worry about the cops coming. Like, it's just a different world now, right? Like we were even talking about homegrown, like we got in Connecticut. And so I rarely notice it or remember it because I still feel like there's so much work to be done. But every once in a while, friends and the public will come up and just be like, just thank you. Like, thank you for doing that, for taking the time. And it's definitely, I know that it's having an impact, even if I don't think on it a lot, right? Like, it's definitely, when I look back to where we were, when I first started with SSDP as a student, there were 0 states that were legal, right? That was 2008. And so I was there when Dan Malloy was running for governor in Connecticut, who ended up decriminalizing and helping him run on that issue. And so even just in the last 10 years, we've gone from like 0 to half the country has adult use cannabis. That is incredibly fast, like compared to how long it took us to get here. And so I think everyone that's on this call, everyone in M4MM who played tremendous roles in all these different states, right? The idea that in 2013, right, we had 0 adult use states, and now we have almost half the country and the majority of the population in adult use state is an incredible achievement. And so all the other details aside, like we do have to, have a minute to sip the coquito, all right, have a little flan and enjoy it, because like there are few movements that have been able to have that amount of progress so condensed, right? And it's really wild to think about it. But of course, as activists, like the work's never over. And so I'm always figuring out where can I put my skill set next. And actually, Puerto Rico, and the nation of Puerto Rico, is a place that I feel like can better take advantage of my skill set, where now Connecticut, will be fine. It will continue. But, La Patria is definitely more important to me, and it just needs more support.
And I mean, everybody knows I'm always getting everybody to get on board with the whole Puerto Rico movement. But I must say, you have been that one person that we've had conversations on. How can we get Puerto Rico going? How can we get Puerto Rico going? How can we get it going? And knowing that technically Puerto Rico is a social equity market. You're seeing so many, we have over 400 licensed operators that are all minority business owners. You're not seeing that in any other market. But it's a shame the way that they're going, and we can have a whole other conversation on that. But that goes back to where the framework of social equity and cannabis legislation, we're seeing so many people take a hit, so many markets that thought they were going to boom. Where do you see the industry heading into, especially when we talk about more social equity programs? I'm from Florida. I have no idea what you're talking about when you say.
Yeah, well, Florida, maybe that's for another conversation of what's going on in Florida. But, like, that's a complicated one. And that's definitely a case of like, is all progress good progress? But Puerto Rico, I think, is a bit different, right? It's an island, first of all. And so issues around interstate commerce and like, it's, I always want to say, people are already smoking and people are already growing weed in every state and territory in the country. And so we're not stopping or creating anything. But I do think that when interstate commerce comes to be a reality, Puerto Rico disproportionately benefits from that, because being able to export off the island is going to dramatically increase our potential markets, but specifically because there's more Puerto Ricans in the States than there are on the island. So just in a pure numbers sense, if you're able to sell to just the Puerto Ricans in, Orlando or Hartford or New York City, like there's just huge markets that are very inclined to support a Puerto Rican grown product. So I think that is where the positive future of the island is going to be. I think they're going to and already are talking about adult use. I could also see Puerto Rico taking the DC approach that just says everybody is a patient and not necessarily taking a full adult use approach, because there are pros and cons to that. One of the bigger differences in Puerto Rico is there's a lot of small operators in the medical space, where a lot of the other states, it was 4 or 5 big entities that were owned by out-of-state money, where in Puerto Rico, it's not like that. Like there are lots of smaller folks that if the medical market just flipped over, I'd have very different feelings about it, right? The other thing is that equity has been a word used to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it's going to be a fascinating and beautiful conversation. I'm really excited to have it, of what does it mean to Puerto Rico, right? Because I define equity mostly around whether or not your criminal justice impacted. And that is different than folks that take a specifically race-based approach. Puerto Rico has had lots of people arrested for weed, right? It was not even that long ago, the young man was arrested for 2 joints and he got locked up for 2 years, right? And Padilla had to come in and pardon him. It was this whole big thing, right? And that was over 2 joints. There have been situations where Puerto Rican prisoners have been shipped to the States because Puerto Rico's prisons are just too full, and it creates this whole problem, people being able to visit. And so we have a lot of work to do on the island, but Puerto Rico has also been a battleground when it comes to the war on drugs in all the different ways, positive, negative, and everything else, right? In not just cannabis and lots of other drugs. People smuggle drugs through Puerto Rico so that they can get to the US easier. There's violence. There's been a lot of gun violence around the issues, right? Opioid and all overdose problems have skyrocketed in Puerto Rico. It has also been a place that has always struggled with folks that had problematic drug use staying on the island. And so there's a whole conversation that needs to be reckoned with, both as a people and our elected officials and our history and the status of the island as well. So this conversation that I don't think has happened in a very public way, or to the extent that the movement that currently exists in drug policy equity and the Puerto Ricans that are involved, the Latinos, the amount of support that we could get from the outside space to have these conversations and implement real programs. And so what equity means to Puerto Rico is going to be a very, meaningful and pivotal conversation, so that whatever comes out of that really does benefit us. It's going to be a different conversation than we've seen everywhere else. But I think no matter what the end result is, it will be incredibly beneficial to the island, right? We can address histories of trauma. We can address economic issues. We can address agricultural issues, which are particularly relevant to Puerto Rico. And so I'm very much looking forward to taking the cannabis plant and putting it in everybody's face and say, what are we going to do about these problems? Because we're able to address a lot of other problems in that conversation.
I feel that Puerto Rico can honestly put all their eggs in a basket into the cannabis industry and fix their local economy. They can fix infrastructure. They can fix their medical system, bring more jobs, attract more students, all
Mm-hmm.
based off of the cannabis industry. I know that last year we tried to go adult use, but again, the misinformation, the lack of support. I mean, you had, like you said, you had so many people come into Connecticut and support, give testimony, attend public hearings. Puerto Rico doesn't get that love. There is no M4MM down there. There is no SSD down there. No one is down there. They're kind of like on their own. And like you said, this is no MSOs down there. This is not big corporate money. These are small businesses that were coming from all different sectors and said, hey, this is an opportunity. Let's take advantage. Let's jump in. And now they're like, wow, why did we do this? But the one thing I will say about Puerto Rico is that it really, really was that testament that if you properly educate, you can change the perspective. Because as we started seeing more working class leave Puerto Rico because of all the disasters and lack of opportunities, more and more of the older class was going into dispensaries and participate in the program. And you have the metro area that, yes, they have, the young and the hips and all the cool, what you see, the culture. But when you're going out to Isabela, out into the mountains, yeah, it's not that. Like we're in bed by like 8 o'clock when the sun goes down. There's not. So you're seeing people turn more to cannabis use. And I love seeing that because it's like, I met this one lady that, she was like, oh, yes, every night I drink hot chocolate with el pan sobado and I melt the infused chocolate in my milk. And that's how I do it. So
Hanging, yeah.
seeing the older generation, yes. And I love when all the titis come out and be like, don't tell anybody, but I do use cannabis. So it really showed me that the education is what's lacking.
I have some good examples of that. Actually, my Titi Carmen just came from the island. Everybody's Puerto Rican's got a Titi Carmen, right? And so, but she came to Connecticut recently, and it was the first time folks said the cannabis stuff out loud, right? Where before that, I'd always have the uncle like, hey, man, can I talk to you like over here for a second, right? And then they would be like, so what's up with this weed thing, right? Where now this time they were just like, so what's up with the cannabis thing in Puerto Rico? And I was just like, oh, okay, I guess we're there now. And the year before, when I went to see mi abuela, she was always against it. She knew that what I was doing was like politics, right? And things like that. So she was like, okay, it's fine. I see you don't changing laws. But this was the first summer where I went there and she had talked to her neighbor, un vecina, right? Vecino, that had her medical card. And so she asked her about it. Why, like, do you like it? What is it? I thought it was bad, right? And, oh, no, I love it. It was fantastic. I feel great. So when I went back, she asked me, like, so can you like get me something like edibles or whatever? And I was kind of like, what changed? She's like, oh, my friend, And I was like, well, when the older folks starting to talk to each other, right? And it's just like better than being on a lot of the different types of medicine. And it is a huge portion of the population is elderly in Puerto Rico. And so it's without a doubt an untapped resource of learning how to communicate with older folks of color because it's such a high percentage of the population. And I think that's one aspect of how the plant can help heal our older folks that are still dealing with trauma from Hurricane Maria and other things. And, Ricky Rosselló had to get ousted, right? It's been a really active, last few years in Puerto Rico. And so folks see that this is a better option than what they've been dealing with when it comes to pharmaceutical medications, which actually Puerto Rico produced a lot of pharmaceuticals for a very long time. Viagra was mostly produced in Puerto Rico. And so you're welcome, like all the couples out there that are still together. But there's these huge facilities that could become cannabis extraction facilities and cannabis medicine. And where, yes, there's the flower and there's, dispensaries, but we have folks that are going for FDA approval of psychedelic therapies, right? Like that are very serious scientific endeavors. And Puerto Rico is incredibly well situated to really look at the adult use, the tourism, the agricultural, but also how this plant can specifically help address aging seniors, right? We know that the plant is helpful in being a neuroprotectant for your myelin sheaths and your neurons on your brain, which helps prevent the onset and makes it less serious things like Alzheimer's, right? And so there is just tremendous potential in research, in medical fields, in all the different fields that I'm with you. It is putting all in your eggs in one basket, but a basket that has like 1,000 different versions of eggs in it, and saying we're going to keep going through the eggs until we get the golden goose, right? And then we got it. But I think the various types of potential impact are always underestimated. Folks just think about, I just want to buy cannabis and be able to smoke it like at a bar, but the sheer economic impact across so many different sectors, I think, is definitely underestimated, especially by the folks on the island. And when we're able to organize, because the big thing we say, folks aren't, as active, or we just don't have that much support, right? Like that is a result of us deciding as a Puerto Rican community that other things were a higher priority, right? Even myself, I had to focus on Connecticut for a while because the fight in Connecticut was happening then. But when it changes is when folks like me, folks like you, folks like the folks at home decide to make the rebuilding of our nation a priority and use whatever skill set you have to bring to the island and physically go and begin to do that. That's a big reason why I truly feel like Connecticut will be fine, and I'm called to pull folks to the island. And I do think the coolness of the industry, that it is a better job, it's a better way to live in a lot of ways. It can be a little bit chaotic, but I'd rather do that than work in a factory. And it is something that could pull our generation back to the island. It's a thing that could actually create jobs, and folks that have experience in the cannabis industry in the home state can go build the cannabis industry in Puerto Rico. And that's how we have the brain gain. So we start to pull people that were CFOs in an MSO or worked as a bud tender in 10 different dispensaries, right? That those are now the experts that could come in and say, I'll come back, right? If there's a way for me to build this industry, I will come back and I will put in the effort to do it. And I think that there are millions of Puerto Ricans that would do that. We just have to create the pipeline. And I think that's where this conversation is, and where our work is going and finding those brilliant Boricuas that are willing to, sacrifice a couple of years on a tropical paradise to help us build our nation.
Sometimes I don't like to tell people to go there because it's such a gem that you just don't want it to get overpopulated with people. But it's very true. We have the opportunity where, the current shape of Puerto Rico, we lack doctors, we lack accountants, we lack people in those executive roles that can come in and lend such a hand and create so much job opportunities to amplify the industry. And if Puerto Rico pivots into adult use, Puerto Rico has two main airports. They get over 25 billion visitors globally. We have the cruise ports that stop there. So there's such an opportunity on the economical side. But going back to the medical side and to the locals, Puerto Rico this year, they had a higher rate of adult diapers in sales than they did of infant diapers. So it goes to show you that more and more people are leaving, and what's staying is our elders with the real ailments. And they've figured out, if I take this edible, it might help me with my blood pressure. Shout out to Juana Lecea from Los Veteranos, el capítulo de Veteranos in Puerto Rico. He has a testament on where he went from 24 different medications that he was on. He's a veteran for PTSD and all ailments, and cannabis has amplified his health. He's cut down his medication just because of cannabis. So there's so much opportunity there. And then since we are talking about overdose awareness, Puerto Rico, I mean, it's no secret. I remember the first time I ever went and I saw, I mean, the kid couldn't have been more than like 15, 16 years old. And for those that have never been to Puerto Rico, San Juan, the one where you see all the beautiful pictures and everybody's always at, it's right there next to La Perla. And although people love to take pictures in La Perla, and it's really beautiful because it's right on the water, like it is the best view when you're in that area. But it's hood. Like Puerto Rico has had issues where, yes, they have, like, they're their own municipality, and they have their organized leaders that they've had issues where they themselves have told police officers, like, no, you cannot come in here, you cannot investigate. And the police officers say, okay, because technically there's only one way in and one way out. So this is where like the hub of crime and drugs are happening. And the biggest problem Puerto Rico has is, I mean, they have so many people that are addicted to like horse tranquilizers. So, I mean, cannabis is a joke to them when you're talking about, you know, people are shooting up horse tranquilizers mixed with fentanyl, and that is the real crisis. And those are the people that really need the support. And we all know that cannabis can be that stepping stone and that support for people that are going through recovery. But it's insane to see how Puerto Rico has so many people, so much overdose, so much drug usage. I mean, we see it all over the nation. You know, where every state you go into, they're having their different issues with overdose, but it's just insane because, like you said, people don't understand that a lot of drug importations, they kind of come in through Puerto Rico and then go in stateside. As you guys are working with Students for Sensible Drug Policy, what are some of the barriers and what are you guys doing to overcome that war?
Yeah, so first I'll say, I think the biggest source of crime in Puerto Rico is actually La Fortaleza, which is the governor's mansion. And so I wouldn't put that on La Perla. There is another neighborhood right up the road from La Perla that's doing much bigger crimes.
Well, they're both next to each other, so there you go.
Exactly, but you know, La Perla never took anybody's pension away, and so, but you know, when it comes to dealing with folks that are struggling with drug and substance abuse, one of the important things to keep in mind is that what we've been doing previously has not been working. We've seen an increase in overdose deaths over the last 12 years, and actually Hispanics, Latinos, but Hispanics per a lot of the data had the largest rise in increase over the last 20 years, and specifically going into COVID, where it was about 5 out of 1,000 people would suffer from an overdose to 21. So it was a 4 times increase between 2010 and 2021. And while other communities had higher numbers to start, ours was lower. And so there was a time when we actually had less of a problem than other communities, and then it skyrocketed up in the last 12 years. And so we have a particular situation where we clearly missed our timeline, where we were supposed to be much more supportive to each other and help this happen. And when the overdose epidemic kind of came out, we were hit the hardest, the fastest, right? And that is in part because a lot of these drugs, and a lot of both legal and illegal, are tested on Puerto Ricans and are started and, you know, given to folks in Puerto Rico because we have different rules for everything. And so we are sort of the front of when something happens in Puerto Rico, it's likely to happen to the States. The Trank, which is xylazine, which is one of the more recent, really difficult drugs that has been popped up, was noticed in Puerto Rico in 2012. Right. And now it's a big problem here in the States, but it had been reported in Puerto Rico a long time ago. So helping Puerto Rico address overdose and drug use is at the front lines of helping everybody else in all of the other states afterwards have the ability to figure out what is the best process there, where unfortunately we are given the least amount of resources to deal with this, and we double down on really bad policy. And the politicians of all the parties in Puerto Rico are very ancient in their thinking and, haven't figured out how to really move on this idea of prohibition and the war on drugs. And so when it comes to folks that want help or want to access help, there is just not that help available. And so it is also a place where, it's warmer and it's easier to live on the streets where you don't have to worry about homeless shelters or, folks freezing like in Connecticut and New York, right? There's just different situations. And so I think in a lot of ways, just like Puerto Rico has to and is starting to move on from really demonizing cannabis, the same will have to happen for those other drugs and figuring out exactly how we help those folks out. Arresting them doesn't work. It's just going to drain a lot of resources. And we tried that for the last 30 years. Now, that's not to say that all drugs should be totally legal and in the stores, you can buy it at Walgreens, right? Like that's not what the approach is. We need to end the criminalization and actually figure out the processes that do work and fund those. Now, the folks that work in social services do know if you gave them money where they would put it to help that problem, right? There are people with the expertise that, if given the resources, can make a big difference. Never get rid of it completely, but we can reduce it back down to pre-2010 levels and save a significant number of lives and save a tremendous number of young people, because generally speaking, addiction happens when folks feel detached from society. And so being able to help folks deal with building community, ensuring they have social services and personal networks to reach out to, helps prevent a lot of those situations. But things like Hurricane Maria and being a colony are very, very difficult situations to deal with for even wealthy folks, right? But let alone folks that are already struggling to begin with. And so you have a recipe for a lot of despair, right? Where things just seem so hard. And they are hard, right? And it's compared to anywhere else, it is very difficult to live in Puerto Rico if you don't have a significant amount of money already coming in. And so there are lots of ways that we can address this. At Students Responsible Drug Policy, we actually created a fellowship with the state of North Carolina and an organization called Vital Strategies. That shout out to Kat Humphreys, our friend over there, who's an SSDP alumni, to create what's called a fellowship, where you bring on a number of students, you give them a small stipend and education, and then they take that education and do some kind of action with it. So on Overdose Awareness Day, which is August 31st, and this is happening everywhere, there are events in Puerto Rico and all across the country. If folks want to sign up, you can definitely find out at Overdose. I think it's going to come across the screen here, but I believe it is Overdose Day, right? Yeah, overdoseday.com. And that is going to show you where all the different events are. But we trained 6 young people, including a Latina, Josa Handy Davila, she's fantastic, to reach out to various communities and learn how to talk to folks about overdose, what kind of information is available, so that if you are interested in either getting some support because you yourself are dealing with drug addiction, or a family member is dealing with drug addiction, or you just want to support the organizations and the people that are doing the work, this is the day where everybody kind of comes together to be able to talk about what's happening in your local community. And so SSDP trains young people, just like these 6 fellows, but all across the country, to do things like naloxone trainings. And so naloxone, or Narcan, is the brand name for what most folks might have heard of, is an opioid antagonist. And so it actually disconnects the opioids from your nervous system, and it saves your life if you're going through an overdose. And so it's a nasal spray that if somebody's going through it, you can just use it immediately. Anybody can use it. And that is one way to help address overdose. We also work on policies that say the state of Connecticut or the state of Florida is going to provide more funding to certain things. And there's lots of different programs that could get funded. It could be a criminal justice reform, where you're saying if somebody has possession of a small amount of drugs, send them to substance abuse treatment rather than prison. Or folks are writing articles, creating art. But there's also much more emotional work, like holding a vigil for all the folks that we've already lost to drugs and drug violence, right? And so there's a place for everybody in the space, and there's something about this particular issue that we all, and I mean all, know about and interact with, even from the most elite, wealthiest people in the world to the folks that are, you know, on the front lines in our communities that don't have any housing, right? All of those folks have either themselves had a family member or themselves struggle with addiction. They know somebody who's passed away from different types of drug problems. And so it is one of the spaces where we all know we can do better. We have loved ones that were hurt by this, and it's a very difficult problem to address. And so when there is a hard problem that will benefit everyone, then it is certainly something that we can all come together to try to address. And there's lots of ways to do it. And so we do it by training young people. We do it by keeping people out of prison, but there are lots of ways that we can go about this. I will just say one of the things that we shouldn't do is demonize people that use drugs and demonize particular drugs, because there's new drugs every day. And so saying that one particular thing is bad isn't going to help you when the next 5 things happen. Same thing with teaching young people about drug use. Saying don't do fentanyl isn't going to help them if they're experiencing xylazine and it's something else, right? But teaching young people to know what they're doing, to know what they're taking if they are taking drugs, to know how to test their drugs, to know how to say no, know how to say yes, right? And making sure you're very informed of what you're doing, and that any precautions that can be taken are taken. And that is going to help them no matter what drug they encounter, right? Also things about dosing. So there are many drugs that are really bad for you if you take them in high doses, and not as bad for you if you take them in low doses. I always say, like alcohol. If I drank a bottle of grain alcohol thinking it was water or thinking it was beer, it could kill me. It could really seriously hurt me. But if you take a little bit and put it in juice, then that's a cocktail, right? And so there's just a lot of skills that we teach young folks that can be applied in any situation. And I think that is going to be more effective than continuously trying to have the police come in after something bad happens and clean it up, where we really want to make sure folks are doing it right from the beginning, and that they have the tools and skills they need to actually both talk to their friends about it, but make their own decisions appropriately.
I agree. And just the lack of information sometimes, especially in minority communities. And when you're talking about Latino community, I mean, we have the whole language barrier. My mom, I mean, she doesn't like to admit it and she won't say it, but she was addicted to painkillers for years and years, but she didn't feel it was an addiction. And she'll still tell you, well, now she's starting to come around more. We're starting to incorporate therapy, which is another taboo thing in our Latin communities. But a lot of it is because a doctor will recommend you this same medication. So when we think of people that are addicted, like you're thinking of someone that's gonna like in alleyways and they're gonna sell you their TV and like this horrible scenario. And we don't realize that this can be your mom, your aunt. Yes. And then growing up, to me, it was very normal to see like, oh, you have a pain? Here, try this. Here, there. It's okay. It's okay. But we don't understand, you know, where that whole connection with the addictions come and where all the pain medication and addiction for those came. And like you said, it's a disconnection. I had someone say no because I think it was his cousin. As soon as he started using cannabis, he saw this disconnection and all this, you know, mood and character change. And then, you know, it turned into different things and it just spiraled out of control. But I was like, wait a minute, let's step back. What led to him even wanting to try this to begin with? Like, where was that underlying issue? And I think that we don't talk about this enough, and we don't talk as a society enough about mental health and the root of traumas. And I mean, we all tend to mask it, and sometimes it just goes down a very slippery slope. So I don't feel that we should all be pointing but rather just educate, let people know, like, hey, there's resources, there's tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's community solutions to things, right? Like we don't have to rely on the government to solve all of the problems, and it's not the most effective way to solve most problems, right? And so a big part of my work was just getting government out of things, right? If you could just get a lot of the police out of the way or let folks just be able to do what it is that they needed to do without police intervention, you're already in a positive direction, right? But I do think that there's religious reasons and there's just like cultural reasons why folks don't want to admit when folks are struggling, right? Like folks, especially on the island, but even Puerto Ricans in general, will hold a lot of pain and just let it fester and sit there for not wanting to be a burden, or because Latina moms are on your ass anyway, even if you're not complaining. And so I'm going to add this on top of it. They just tell me, like, why am I crying for it, right? And so I had a very tough, strong mom, helped me, deal with institutions of power and the police, right? But when I needed to be like, I need help, dealing with some personal stuff, it's like a struggle to get it out. I always just say, like, I have no problem like leading an army into war, but if I got to talk about my feelings, I just crumble, and so, we all definitely struggle with that part. But Puerto Rico has a particularly, core solidarity to our identity that has been through so much struggle and so much difficulty and persevered through things that were so oppressive, right? That when someone or multiple people eventually do choose to push through it, right? And so it's the same thing when I first started with cannabis. I had to push through all the angry conversations. That's not what everybody can do or wants to do, right? But I had to have 20 years of negative conversations about cannabis, and now everybody's coming around. But I think partly because everybody's coming around is because folks like me and you were willing to go to a church and say, I think we should legalize weed. And they're going to be mad, right? And they're going to say their things. And a lot of, especially our elders, really just want someone to listen to them and take them serious. And then if you're able to do that and come back with an actual plan to move forward, they'll support you. And then they'll be your strongest supporters that you've ever had. And so it just, we kind of have to know that it's a trial by fire and accept that we're going to walk on coals. It's going to be hot on our feet, right? And we got to do it anyway, because what's on the other side of that is a much more beautiful world that we can build together if we're willing to get our feet a little hot every once in a while. And I think, it's hard to ask a community that is constantly going through trauma to just push through the test of fire and, it'll be great later. Pero it's the only option that we have, right? And so when folks are ready, when the community has lifted enough folks into a place where they are healed enough to be able to do this work, we do need folks that are willing to go out there and talk to folks. Because I think just like this one, and in this particular situation, it wasn't legality that determined if the drug was good or bad for them, right? A lot of the, especially older folks that initially got hooked on opioids, it was a legal source, right? It was a doctor that gave them a prescription and Walgreens sold it to them over and over and over again. Or it was, a viejito that gets hurt, right? Like hurts their back or goes through surgery. And they're just like, here you go. Here's some Oxycontin, here's some fentanyl. Because fentanyl is a drug that's used in hospitals. For example, if you're going to get spine surgery, right, you're not going to be able to heal for a very long time. Fentanyl will make you bear that process, right? And so there are uses for these drugs. That's why they exist. But knowing how to interact with drugs without it being based on whether or not a police officer is mad at you is how you end up with better healthcare results for everybody, because we're not relying on an outside authority that is profiting from particular decisions to determine if something is good or bad. And luckily, I think a lot of folks in the cannabis community are naturally inclined to be like, I don't care what the doctor says or doesn't say, right? Or what the lawyer says or doesn't say. I want to know what this does to my body. Can it be helpful, right? Like a little bit more open-minded. And there is a good amount of, cultural, religious support for plant-based medicine in Puerto Rico too. Like there's no doubt about it. Like the culture is very much, like put some plants on it and you'll be okay. And I think there is a particular path, right, for the young folks to take the heat a little bit from the viejitos that have gone through some traumatic situations, but provide an actual avenue to move forward. And that's our opportunity in our generation right now in Puerto Rico, is that there are paths for us to go and help. We just have to choose that that's what we're going to do, and, go through a few calls first.
I completely agree with you. I mean, my grandmother, she had hip surgery and she came out to Puerto Rico and she participated in the program. I think our program is amazing as far as product and diversity. We have all types, like we tend to put the culture of Puerto Rico into our product lines. So you're going to find
Puerto Rico on everything.
Yeah.
We put a flag on it. We'll put a flag on a gas cap. We'll put a flag on whatever you want. We'll put more Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other thing. Like, as long as you slap, the culture, the flag onto it, like, we'll take it. We have everything from, like, you could buy a bucket of Nutella that's infused. You could buy ice cream. You could buy syrup down there. So what I loved was that it had so many products. And this is what I would get for my grandmother. So she would have her chocolate, she would have her things. And she didn't feel like, oh, this is la marijuana. This was cannabis, which to her, I mean, she's 91. She'll be turning 91 this year. So nice. I continue to tell her, like, it's the same, but that's to her, yeah, nope. El cannabis medicinal is great. It helps. And she saw it in her doctor's office and she was like, oh, esa es mi nieta. But if you tell her marijuana, she's like, no, el que se fuma, no, ese no. So we still have to do the work, but it's such a great, like, if you start having these conversations and you start telling abuela, like, hey, this is why it helps me. Even when they say, like, oh, because la juventud está perdida. It's not. It's, youngsters have stress too, and maybe it's not at the same magnitude, but when you're in high school, high school is life. You feel like there's nothing else out there but this current moment. And to them, that's everything. So you see more of the youth that they're going through things and they find this disconnection and they find different outlets. And I don't really think that cannabis is the gateway drug. I think it's alcohol. I've never done anything stupid with cannabis, but I have so many stories.
Like, it's the cell phone now, right? Like, because one of the biggest addiction is whether or not you feel isolated. And because of social media, the way folks are interacting, Hurricane Maria, COVID, right? Like, if you were somebody who, was born in, say, like 2005, right? And you're 10 in Hurricane Maria, and then you're like 17 and 18 and COVID, your entire life has been chaos and isolation. And so, of course, there's going to be folks that turn to drug use when you literally can't go outside your house. You don't have electricity for months. They're telling you this virus that came from another side of the world means you have to shut the entire economy down, right? I am, like, very much more concerned with how the digitization of socializing is going to create folks that have very little social skills. So of course they're going to be feeling isolated, and that is going to lead to harder drug addiction, even more so than alcohol right now. Although alcohol is without a doubt the drug that most people try first and leads to other things, right? And has a much higher damage potential than a lot of other drugs. But it's really the despair and the lack of community and the lack of positive, goals and dreams and real ways to work through the difficulty that I'm just very concerned, especially having working with a lot of Gen Z folks and a lot of, younger generations. It's not that they're going out and drinking tons of alcohol and then getting hurt. It's that they're not going out at all. And they just stay home. And then it's very difficult to build community, to build movements when everybody's at home by themselves. So that I'm very worried about. And I have a daughter, she's 10. And so I saw the impact of the pandemic on their mental health at a young age. And now these young folks are, coming out and had, some folks, their entire time in college, for example, was under COVID. right? And so that radically changes your experience in how you see the world and, what the best times of your lives were, right? Like, and so I think we're going to be dealing with that a lot. Luckily, cannabis did help a lot of people in those spaces, but I think that's going to be one thing that as a movement that's less about the plant and more about us as people, that cannabis activists are community builders, right? We've had to, out of necessity, build community, and even clandestine, right? Where we couldn't even tell people we were doing it because they would look at us funny, where we may be just as useful now as community builders as we are on policy. And I think we're going to see that skill set really help when it comes to dealing with things like addiction, with building entire new nations, right? Building movements, building industries, that we have had some experience having to do that. And, it's one of the skill sets that's most needed right now.
No, I mean, it's true. Like the pandemic, and specifically in Puerto Rico, because I visited my family in Florida, and I came back to Florida, and it was like, pandemic what? There was no pandemic.
Florida's a special
yeah, I mean, my daughter, for the longest time, we had just moved to Puerto Rico, and we had earthquakes. So thanks to the earthquakes,
that's you.
Don't forget the earthquakes. You cannot turn off any sudden lights, and even the air conditioner at night, I have to leave it running all night, because if it turns off, we all wake up because we think the power went out. So we are so traumatized.
Yeah.
And then my daughter, for the longest time, she thought Puerto Rico had no people because we couldn't go outside. We couldn't exercise outside. You couldn't step a foot out your door. They would bring you back in. Like, a lot of people don't understand the restrictions that we were in. And sometimes people say, well, why would you even be there? I mean, for us, it gave us such a great quality of life because it stopped the world, and it brought my family together, and we got to spend time with the kids. And my son is 4, and now is that we're like coming back and integrating with the world, I say, and it feels so weird. But you saw how people were isolated. There were no kids going to playgrounds. The older people, after the earthquake, people already started to leave because they knew, like, I already went through this through Maria. I'm not doing this again. And when you leave, the older folks, and then it's the older folks that are like, I'm not leaving. And that really did a number on their psyche and their mental health, and not having people to speak to. And one thing, I'm not a hugger. I'm a Scorpio. I don't like people to come into my space. But Puerto Ricans love to hug. Like, to tell a Puerto Rican that you cannot hug, I mean, that was just like the most painful thing to see. I mean, you will see people going, oh. So it was, people don't understand the type of PTSD, but at the same time, like, these are the most resilient people that will come together. Like, your power goes out, you have a crisis. Oh, they're on it. They're moving. They're getting things done. But I love to see how more and more people are turning to support the industry. And these are not like young folks that, like, my daughter will never know what the war on drugs is. Like, she sees it everywhere. I think she can practically give you a speech.
A long time ago.
Yes. So to see how our elders,
the dream come true, like, I hope my daughter has to look back in history class and be like, what was this thing? This sounds so dumb, right? But we have some time. I do think our kids will still know. Maybe their kids won't, but our kids will see us end it, and that's what they'll know about it.
And that's the important part, that they'll be at cutoff. I'll turn around.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, tell us, how can we get more information about what you are doing, what your organizations are doing? What do you have coming up? Give us the rundown.
Yeah, so definitely ssdp.org. If there are any young folks that want to learn more about Overdose Awareness Day, it's overdoseday.com. And we do a lot of different work. We have chapters that cover all different types of drugs. So it is a good space if you're maybe someone that likes cannabis but wants to learn more about psychedelics and have been impacted by overdose. SSDP chapters are perfect because you'll meet folks that are experts in that, and we cover all the different pieces. But definitely Overdose Awareness Day is August 31st. Strongly encourage everyone to get involved. Even if it's the first time you've ever done activism that wasn't cannabis related, but you want to figure out how to help, these events are going to happen across the country. And again, I really do think just like cannabis brings all communities together, this is an issue that needs everybody's help. Folks that have struggled, folks that haven't, folks that want to figure out how to help people, all the above. So definitely August 31st. Check out Overdose Awareness Day. And then I will be transitioning out of my role at SSDP in October. And one of the last events I'm going to be doing, and hopefully I'll see lots of folks there, the Drug Policy Alliance is having their reform conference in Phoenix, Arizona on October, I believe it's 18th to the 21st. And so I'm really excited to go there, see everybody what's going on, introduce so many amazing people together. And then, in the future, focus a little bit more. Puerto Rican elections are coming up. We got to start figuring out how we're going to do it. So if there are any Boricuas out there that want to get involved, definitely hit me up. You can hit me up on Instagram, Jason J. Ortiz. Always down to talk strategy with folks, to scheme, figure out how we can help the island. Because I do think the next phase for all of us is to sit down and say, I'm going to be one of the people that's going to put in time to do this. This is what I want to see in a legalization bill. This is what I think cannabis equity should mean to Puerto Ricans, so that we can all get in a room together, see where there's overlap, see where there's disagreement, work out the disagreements, emphasize the agreements. And from there, as a community, both folks on the island, aquí y allá, it's going to take both. And I think a lot of folks now have gone back and forth enough. There's less of a sharp divide between the two communities. And it's more folks are just, where are you at now? But we need to, as a community, write our version of legalization, right? And that is not the politicians' version of legalization that is only what they think will pass. What does it really look like? And if you were president, right, if we were the president of the independent nation of Puerto Rico, how would we design it from the ground up, right? Really dream, what could this possibly look like? That we put it into writing, propose it to the community, propose it to the politicians. But what's more important is to get the community on board, because they'll get you the politicians. And so from there, it's bringing our ideas, defending them, and sharing them in a compassionate way to folks that maybe don't agree with them. And I think if we're able to do that, if we're able to take that to the next election, Puerto Rico's cannabis industry, Puerto Rican community will come out of this election ready to make some really big moves.
Yes, and I am so excited because we've been talking about getting more of that unified support to get into the island. I know that every chance I get, I always like, Jason, over here, over here. But I really feel like finally this is it. And like you said, you can support. It doesn't matter where you are, because guess what? Each one of us, especially these on the states, we are the constituents and the voters. So when we come together in large numbers, oh, they care. So if we can get the entire community together and start making a movement, they're going to listen. And Puerto Rico's not that.
Yeah, and to all the diasporicans, right? Like, we have so many folks that are experts in particular fields that could write a section of the bill. Like, I see Michael Diaz Rivera is on here. How would you design delivery in Puerto Rico, right? Like, how would we do it on an island-wide basis, right? And Jodeci is on here too. How are we doing edibles on the island? We have all these beautiful, delicious fruits and vegetables. How are we going to incorporate our agricultural system into our edibles policies, right? So, like, there are so many brilliant, beautiful Boricuas that have a part of the bill, and they're the experts in it. So just try to figure out your piece. And then when we put it all together into the mosaic that is, Borinquen and Boricuas, we will come up with an incredible vision for the future. And so definitely just encourage everybody, think about what that section of the bill that you are the expert on would look like, and write it down, put it in words, and then send it our way. And then, we can help to coordinate everybody. And Mariela can definitely make sure that we all get on the same page and get something done.
Yes, absolutely. I love your support. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. I mean, I'm glad that you were able to share with us, and I hope everyone has some amazing takeaways here. Thank you again, Jason, for joining us. And as you all see below, follow him, follow the organization, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Last Prisoners Project. They're doing amazing work. Every organization, if we can come together and put in the work, I mean, we're so much larger in numbers. Jason was my favorite. We saw you at the lobby day. We were the two organizations out there knocking on doors. Like, of all people, I was like, yes,
solidarity. Okay, we met in the halls of power. That's where we needed to be, right? So, gracias, Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Always a pleasure. Roz, Nicole, everybody keeping it going. Thank you so much, and excited to keep it going until we're all free.
Beautiful. So thank you so much for all of you. Please tune in to all our different programmings. We have So the Land that is coming back. We have Nicole Buffon that does Health is Wealth. We have Can of Talk with Roz. We have Kit that she does What's the 411. So please be sure to follow us, sign up. If you would like, you can register for our freemium membership that is free. So please join us, follow us, and we'll see you next time.
Adiós.